Good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the webinar this afternoon, supporting you and your child at home. My name is Carmel Gallagher, and I am the Paediatric Client Liaison Manager at Owen Mitchell, based in Leeds. And I'm delighted to tell you that this afternoon I'm joined by my co-host, Jessica Mudd, from CPPS. Jessica is a very experienced occupational therapist, and prior to joining CPPS last year, was based at Leeds Children's Hospital, where she led the occupational therapy services for the team there. So a very warm welcome to Jessica as well. Today we are looking specifically at the occupational therapy support needs that you and your child may be dealing with during the COVID pandemic and having to manage those in quite a different way at home. As you will be aware, Owen Mitchell has been delivering a vast array of webinar programmes throughout the period, and this presentation this afternoon is part of our mini series, which is specifically focused on supporting the therapy and medical support needs of children who are accessing services from home during this period of time. And later on today, Jessica is going to be sharing her knowledge and experience with us to go through some of the more routine issues, the common issues that families have been presenting with in clinic. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes explaining to you where we are in our series. So if we just move on to the next slide, you will see that today, it's a little bit of a delay, apologies for that. You'll see that we are on our second presentation. Earlier in the month, some of you may have logged in and listened to and watched our seminar, Managing Your Child's Medical and Therapy Support Needs During Lockdown, which also had a focus on family well-being. That webinar is still available for you to listen to, and you can access that via the Owen Mitchell YouTube channel, or if you have any problems at all, just drop us a line at the end of this webinar and we can make sure that that link is sent to you. Coming up later next month, you will see that we have 3 more webinars to be delivered. We are going to be looking at speech and language therapy needs, before moving on to physiotherapy needs. And then in September, as the schools return and start opening up for children to be back in the classroom, we will have an update on educational healthcare plans and the role of educational psychologists. And I'm also delighted to be able to tell you that we've actually added an additional webinar to that suite, which again is going to be on the 26th of August. And that is specifically focused on sensory support needs. The details will be coming up on the next slide. It will be delivered by Jessica's colleague, Shelley Williams, and will be focused on how you prepare children for that return to school. Many children have been finding it a real challenge, having been out of the school system for an extended period of time. Routines have changed. There's not been the expectation to be up and out in the morning or to be wearing a school uniform. And this webinar will really help to address some of those concerns and help to prepare children for being back in the classroom. So I hope that as many of you as possible can join us for the future events. During the webinar this afternoon, there is the opportunity for you to raise questions throughout. And you should see in your toolbar the question button. If you just click on that, you can type in your question and it will pop up on the screen for myself and the support team to see. We will address those at the end of the webinar, so please don't think that we're ignoring you. It's just that we want to be able to go through the content that Jessica has prepared for us first of all, and then we will have time to respond to those questions more thoroughly at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague Jessica. Jessica, welcome very much to our webinar this afternoon. I know that behind the scenes, the tech team are going to be handing you control. Hopefully you can hear us, Jessica.
Yes, I can, thank you.
And a very, very warm welcome. So I'm going to hand over to you and I'll pick up with you at the end.
Okay, thank you, Carmel. Thank you, everyone. This talks about supporting your child's occupational therapy needs at home. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay. There will be a pause and a delay as each slide's swapped over, so you'll just have to bear with us if that's okay. So the first couple of slides are really just exploring some of the challenges that have come up for children and young people, and it's scary to think that actually it's now 5 months since we actually had lockdown. That's the 23rd of March, and time has flown by in a very strange way. For children, how it's affected them has really varied, as you probably are all aware. It's a unique experience for children and families, and it's really important that that unique experience is really shared with whoever's going to work with them going forward and as they return to school as well, particularly if you're reconnecting with your therapist so that they can then help personalise however they're going to deliver their interventions, dependent upon what your experiences have been, and just have a sense of where the child may be. As we know, most people have had a significant reduction in routines, and for children the most obvious one was the immediate change from being in school to homeschooling, and homeschooling has been incredibly different depending on what school they went to and what that school chose to deliver. And there has been a real sense of a reduction in just their daily occupations and participation, and we've all felt that, and that's led for many to have heightened anxiety and a real uncertainty, and I think for some children an appreciation that of death maybe for the first time, not that they maybe have necessarily experienced that within their family, but just actually that if they look at the media and people hear people talking about COVID, a real sense of fear of what does that mean for them, if they can appreciate that. And it also has there's some positives and there's some negatives. Families have been together all the time, and for some that's been really positive, but where you have siblings that clash or that need just have very differing needs, that can be hugely challenging. But I think for many children and young people, there's been a real sense of them missing their friends, and that even if they have been able to connect and you know, connect via the internet and link up with them, it's not the same as actually seeing them face to face, and the same goes for the wider family. And then I'm not sure how many children have actually missed having access to their therapists or not, but I know that obviously has been a real challenge for parents. And just the whole thing of trying to get your head around COVID and understand and remember, particularly if you have a memory deficit, remembering all the social distancing rules. So it's been a real period of time of change, of challenge, very unique for each child. Can we move on, please? I think it's really important as well to talk about those that have been shielding. That's been a particular challenge and really created a sense of isolation, and now actually as shielding ceases at the beginning of August, there's a real uncertainty as to why that's suddenly stopped, and that's also given some anxiety both for children but also for parents in terms of is it safe to reintegrate with society. For parents, the challenges are, again, numerous and very varied and unique and individual. Juggling childcare whilst trying to work, delivering homeschooling, just that sense of social isolation, you actually don't have the chance to even chat to other parents, but also some of that support network that you as parents were reliant on, and even myself as a parent were reliant on, just disappeared overnight. You don't have your childcare, you don't have the easy access to grandparents, your friends, you don't have all that social contact that keeps you sane. Reduction in care for many, the lockdown had meant a decision as to whether they allowed people to enter the property or not to care for their child, and some parents have made the decision that they didn't want care teams to go in. That's a substantial decision, and the impact of that has been that actually they've then been delivering care 24/7 with no carer support. So we do know that fatigue's been a significant component for parents during lockdown, and that continues. It hasn't changed. Not every care team is back in yet working with families. For those that suddenly have had to have change in work roles or loss of work, then obviously there's financial concerns linked to COVID, and all of that creates anxiety and uncertainty. And at the same time, the therapists have disappeared or felt like they disappeared, and you're wanting to try and complete therapy at home and ensure that your child doesn't go backwards, but either maintains or progresses. And it's also that thing of, if something is wrong with your child, is it safe to access services? Can you actually get hold of anyone? And I think, again, for parents and for any adults, it's that fear of actually, if you get COVID, what does that mean for you? Or if you're unwell, will you be able to look after your children efficiently and effectively? But also, death is never the right time. Some of you will unfortunately have experienced death within this time period, but also it's that fear of leaving your children behind. So we've all been working under huge challenges and pressures, and we can't underestimate those, I don't think, as therapists. Can we move on, please, James? And I think one of the challenges is really that sometimes the government guidance that came out wasn't completely clear, and wasn't also clear for parents of children with disabilities and additional needs, and therefore you've almost had to interpret some of it yourselves. I want to just now move on in terms of recognising those challenges and trying to fit into the context of you then trying to deliver some occupational therapy for your child at home. So this picture is of the person environment occupation performance model. All professionals have a theoretical basis, and this is one of the models that we base our practice on as OTs. I am not going to give you a War and Peace talk on this model, but I think it's useful for us to maybe look at just very briefly, because occupational therapists will often use this as the basis for when they're looking at home programmes with children and adults at home. And it's how we consider where a person functions and the skills that they need to function and the environments that they function in. It's also quite useful because I think it highlights for me the impact of COVID actually has just been significant change for all of us on our environment. And the belief is with this model that if you actually address the person's skills and abilities and help them perform those skills and adjust and support them to do that, and also modify the environment and give them opportunities to experience in different environments, that you will then help them to develop occupations, and their occupation performance will improve and their participation will improve as well. Particularly, the core premise of it is if there's a good fit match between the abilities and the support needs of the person and the demands of the occupation, so getting it just right, not being too complex, and that the environment gives them the right support. So when an occupational therapist is looking at a home programme with a parent, we will be looking at and setting goals that are participation focused or occupation focused. So it might be the sort of like I call it like the headline, and then we'll be looking at the skills that they need to achieve the headline underneath. So the headline might be that the child wants to be really quick and able to get undressed and dressed for PE in school, but there's a lot of skills within that, and the environment needs to be modified as well potentially for that, and that's where you then look at what are the underlying skills that are required. Could we move on, please? Firstly, you probably, I don't know as parents if you've been trying to actually maintain contact with your occupational therapist or had difficulty maintaining contact. Services have been working incredibly differently, so that statutory services, a lot of the children's occupational therapists were actually redeployed to help adult services. So there was often only one occupational therapist left to cover an area. Most OTs have now returned to children's services, and things are beginning to return to normal in this new normal. But because they were moved away, there is obviously a natural backlog of work. But I think most therapists are quite concerned that maybe the contact with parents and families has been lost during COVID, particularly for those families that don't shout out or don't know how to ask. But also, I think as services, we are quite reliant on you as families knowing when to ask. So this slide is about when to make contact with an OT, but this is about a priority when you want urgent, immediate contact. And I put this up because I want to help you in terms of thinking about the language that you might use when you ring in, because whoever takes that phone call then has to prioritise it. And if you can get the language right, then that will really help them in terms of working out how quickly they have to respond. So if you have equipment for your child that's not working properly, and that's then causing a safety issue or an issue with how they function, that needs to be reported immediately, and then it can be acted on. And equally, if the child's beginning to grow out of equipment, and I talk about beginning to grow out, this means before they've actually grown out of equipment, because we know it takes a long time for funding to be secured and for the equipment to be provided. So if you can trigger that as soon as possible, that would really help that process. Equally, with any equipment that's been provided, if there's any issues with skin integrity, and by that I mean marking that doesn't go away, so not like when you've worn a pair of jeans and you've got a mark around your waistband and it's gone within 15 minutes, marking that stays, or any skin breakdown, then that needs to be flagged as urgent. And that's important across all areas of equipment, whether it's been provided by the OT, the physio, by nursing staff. If there's any issues, flag with the professional who's provided it. If you have any safety concerns for either yourself or your child, and particularly if moving and handling is becoming difficult, maybe your child's had a big growth spurt, they're beginning to go off their feet, so they can't assist you with their transfers as much, and maybe a hoist was talked about a year ago, but you weren't ready at that stage, and your child hadn't got to that point, but now you are heading there. Make the call before it becomes too challenging and before you hurt yourselves. If you're also concerned about their posture, if they've grown, they've changed, the seat maybe needs altering, again, make the call. Be that posture in the wheelchair, the seating, or in the bed. And if you think they're deteriorating generally in their functional ability, and what the things you're trying to do with them isn't keeping them at the level that you expect them to be at, or you think they're really deteriorating from a mental health perspective, then make a call. So really, my key advice is, if in doubt, make contact. These things are just the priority needs. If you have any issues that you want to be, or anything you want to discuss with an OT, don't hang back, make a call, because we certainly will prioritise what we can do as an occupational therapist, but if we don't know that you need that input, then it might not happen, particularly with statutory services. Can we move on, please? Occupational therapists, like many professionals, are also working differently at the moment. So in terms of face-to-face visits, they have resumed, but not to the level that used to happen before. They've resumed where there is no other way of doing that visit, and the visit will be carried out in PPE. So by that we mean a disposable apron, disposable gloves, disposable face mask, and if there's any airborne treatments or a child that needs suction regularly and it's unpredictable, then they should be wearing goggles or a visor as well. So it's also it's really useful actually if you can prepare your children for what someone might look like if they've not experienced that before. It's really difficult for children. They can't see us smiling at them. You know, and certainly I've now done a number of visits, and you don't get the same response from children because they just tend to stare at you quite strangely, and however mad you are and however friendly you are with them, they just don't get the same verbal the non-verbal messages from, because they can't see half your face, and that's particularly key for children who are non-verbal. I think I've had quite a few quizzical stares. For those that know exactly who you are, that it's not really an issue once you just get over that first point of contact. We are completing detailed risk assessments prior to carrying out any visit, but I think it's really important to bear in mind that as parents and carers, you must be happy with the plans for the visit, and the sign-off and the risk assessment is a joint process for all involved, and the reason for the visit has to be clear. Some of you may have already experienced face-to-face visits, so I hope that's gone well and you felt safe, but also you may have also experienced video call appointments where and these have really come into play. we were doing video call appointments prior to COVID, but only in limited ways, and COVID's obviously just pushed this massively, and I can see video call appointments happening in the future. I don't see them going away, and I think we will have a blend of face-to-face visits and video call appointments, and I think that's quite positive, because actually potentially you don't have to travel for appointments that only took 15 minutes in the future, so that would be good. The sort of things we've been doing, we can observe and assess the child completing an activity on a video call. We can guide you as parents. Parents have been talked through how to adjust the seating system, for example, to allow for growth for the child, and then we can see what their posture's like. We've all been doing meetings with parents, schools, other professionals. So it's, you know, there's lots of opportunities. We're all using different systems. WhatsApp, Zoom, Microsoft Teams is basically what works well and what the family's got access to and feels comfortable with. But I do have to note that for some people, video call appointments hasn't worked. I think one of my biggest surprises was one of my older teenagers. He doesn't like talking on the phone, and he also hasn't responded well to video call appointments. So actually during COVID, because face-to-face visits haven't been indicated, it's been really tricky, and the contact has been maintained through his mum only. And so it doesn't work for everyone, and for those where it doesn't work, you can't replace face-to-face visits. And then telephone call appointments, we've always done those, and also we've always done home programs, but most people have experienced more of these in the last few months, and also there's been definitely much more advice and information packs going out. Can we move on, please? So I just want to cover now the things that you can do and help to build around your child, to help them to function during this time at home, but also help them to access activities. I think one of the important things is actually, and the overall thing really, is actually keep things simple, don't overcomplicate. Certainly as an occupational therapist, all the research evidence that's out there is home programs never work if they're too complicated, if they're too detailed, and if they're really long, and if their expectations are that the parents are going to, and the child is going to do hours on a home program. It's completely unrealistic, and that hasn't changed. So keeping things simple is really important. I think if you haven't done so already, I think I'll be a little bit surprised. I think most families have found a way to create some sort of structure in this strange new world. But I'll run through it anyway, just in case. So firstly, it's about trying to create and set up a routine for the week and for the day. An important feature of that is also maintaining sleep routines. And I think a lot of people's sleep has been really disturbed during COVID, and it's worth revisiting that. And there was an earlier webinar on sleep, so if you didn't access it and you have some concerns, it's worth revisiting and going to look at that webinar. It's also worth thinking about, we're just sort of about to head into August, it's a scary thought, and school looms in September, and getting children back into a sleep routine at the end of summer holidays is a nightmare anyway for most families, and can cause quite a lot of pressure. But I think because children have been on a completely different routine, most families have been getting up later and going to bed later, even if it's just pushed on an hour. It's worth thinking about re-establishing those sleep routines for school in particular in September, maybe earlier than you would normally do. So you maybe want to give yourself a couple of weeks before you actually are heading back into school to get that sleep routine re-established. But in terms of creating routines, it's worth trying to work this together and develop as a family, but also many children are used to things like visual timetables at school. So the picture is an example of one. Many schools use visual timetables, and they'll have them down the side of the smartboard in the classroom. They'll either have symbols, which this one has on, or they'll have pictures. They will sometimes have timings. They really vary, and it's about making it unique and what works to you and your family. But one thing that's really important is having a system so that you know what you've actually done, particularly if you've got difficulty remembering what you've done. So I would also have a system where you can take the symbol off when you've done the activity, and then it's easier for the child to check where they're at and they can follow the correct order. And it's easier to do it in an order from top down to bottom as well. not everyone needs a visual timetable. Some people are happy with having a timetable on the fridge. I'm a bit of a lover of whiteboards. They work really well. You can move them wherever's convenient. I've certainly got a timetable at the moment on my fridge. Don't know that my teenage boys are really enjoying it, but it's really useful because we've shared out the jobs on it. And so I'll challenge them and say, what have you got to do today then? And unfortunately, they agreed to it. This is why it's important to develop it together. And so it's Wednesday, and they've got certain jobs they've got to do on a Wednesday. It just gives them a little bit of structure. It fills a bit of time. Activity is positive. And I think the other thing that you can do with teenagers is also they're very used to having planners in school, and maybe now's a good time to swap them to using and getting used to using their calendar on their mobile phone. So actually they could put key things into their mobile phone, and you may find that you use a combination of the timetable on the fridge and then using their mobile phone. But it's a really good way of using skills and developing strategies for organisation going forwards. I think linked to that structure is about creating activity and jobs lists as a family, and giving it to the skills and the ability of each child. But it also is about finding activities that you can maybe do together, and when they work well, repeating them and almost keeping a record of which activities have been liked and which have worked well, so that actually when you're trying to think as a parent, what am I going to do next week with them, if you have this bank of activities that have worked well, you can just then, you know, think, okay, we did that, that and that, they worked well, okay, we've got some choice now, we could maybe choose one of those again and repeat them. I don't think there's any harm in repeating, but certainly it can be a nice time to share out simple chores and maybe do them alongside each other. I think quite a lot of children have enjoyed, and certainly most families seem to be baking left, right and centre, but that's been a productive activity. Can we move on please, James? I think it's got to be recognised, however, that for a lot of our children, pacing activities is quite key. They can get quite fatigued. They maybe don't have long concentration. They don't have periods where they can sustain their concentration for quite long periods. But also the other thing is that working on a one-to-one basis is really intense, and it's very different working on a one-to-one basis at home compared to in school. And certainly one of my friends who's a teacher said that, and when she was sending stuff out for homeschooling stuff, that she would usually send to give to her mainstream class for maths to do in an hour. The expectations they'd complete it at the end of the lesson. It was taking the children just 10-15 minutes to complete at home, and the parents were then saying, oh, they're not doing very much, oh, the school needs to send much more work out. But actually the children were quite tired from that, because actually it was quite intense, and they don't usually do that. They usually have a little daydream, they have a little chit chat with a friend next to them in the class. They're up to all sorts, and we don't know what they're up to as parents necessarily. And I think it's really very, very valuable just to bear that in mind, that actually short bursts is absolutely key. None of us can actually concentrate for long. You're probably beginning to switch off now in this talk, because they say the first 5 minutes of talk is what people take in, and then after that it all sort of drifts. So short bursts are really useful. Mix harder activities up with quick wins. I always think it's good to sandwich the tough stuff, so you have something easy as one slice of bread, the tough stuff is the filling, and then you have another slice of bread which is something else that they really love and enjoy, and you sort of then hide the harder activities in amongst those quick wins. If you can allow choice, that also helps. So if you know you want to do something to help them work on their fine motor skills, and you go into, rather than giving them the whole toy cupboard to choose from, maybe choose 3 or 4 things yourself as the adult that you know will be really good for them using their hands together, and then give the child the choices out of those 3 or 4 things as to what they want to start with. And actually, because they've got some control, you might find that they're actually a little bit more motivated to have a go. But children are also used to following these instructions, so it helps in terms of getting them back into school and being used to actually being given some choice but still having to follow those rules. Again, if you've got a child that fatigues or has difficulty with concentration, I would pick doing the harder things either early in the day, if that's when they're less fatigued, or when the moment is right. You should be able to gauge that and know when that's appropriate. For some children who have difficulty with motivation and really appreciating that actually they've only got a little bit of work and then they can go and choose to do what they want. Start and finish baskets can be quite helpful. So you put the activity or the activities you want them to do in the start basket. When they finish that work or that activity, they move it into the finish basket, so they have a visual cue that they're working through that work and they've actually finished it. And then after that, they can have a break. They can choose what do they want to do, and that's a really good system, and actually is often replicated in an education setting as well. So add in the breaks, but then what do you do in the breaks? I think it's really important to not then go off and work equally hard in a break. So it's about maybe creating a quiet space, somewhere with cushions, pop-up tents are quite handy, reducing the sensory overload. Many children really struggle with sensory processing and they do get overloaded, and actually they just need a sort of a break from all of that. So reducing background noise, things like turning the TV off, maybe not working with them or not choosing your quiet space. We're in a room where the washing machine's going. Relaxation techniques have been are really useful, particularly for some children, but also quite nice for you as the parent to do with them as well. It's a really nice way to calm and to settle. There are a lot of ideas online, a lot of information about mindfulness, but again, speak to your OT, or you may have a psychologist. Both will be able to provide information around relaxation techniques. And then lastly, in terms of breaks, is remember to keep hydrated. This is everyone. Eating well and regularly, and certainly drinking and keeping hydrated is really important. Next slide, please. I think we've just gone on one. Too many. Can we go back one, please? Been supporting children and young people particularly to stay connected. Things that have worked well have been actually, rather than informal, oh yeah, we'll ring grandma tomorrow, is actually arranging Zoom meetups and having set times for that, and it becoming part of the routine. And that's been really nice. I think it's been nice for across the family as a whole, and that's worked well, but also trying to find constructive ways to connect with friends. I think for a lot of children, and even children who are competent with their communication and quite sociable, it's actually quite hard to have an online meetup with friends with nothing to do. They often run out of things to talk about, particularly, and if they want to have regular contacts, maybe daily or, you know, chip in and out, it's quite good to give them something to do. Some of the teenagers, if they're able to do this safely and they don't get too frustrated, have been able to game online with their peers, and that's had a real benefit. But there's also things like there's an app called Let's Play Uno, where they actually can play Uno with their friend, and it can actually be a group of friends, but equally it doesn't have to be a friend, it can be family members, it could be grandma and grandpa who live at the other side of the country. And there's also an app called Play-Doh app that tends to have traditional games like chess, drafts and other board games that they can play. I think some of the benefits of the Let's Play Uno and the Play-Doh app is that they obviously play at their pace, whereas with gaming, we know it's incredibly quick, it's fast-paced, and also for some children it's hugely stressful and actually causes more problems, particularly when their character gets killed or whatever. So the benefits have been, particularly with the Play-Doh app and Let's Play Uno, is that they've played nicely together, but actually, interestingly, it's meant that as they're playing, they're having a bit of banter and chatting, and it's not necessarily, the benefits have not necessarily been about playing the game. It's meant that they've actually been doing an activity together, which when you think when children get together in school isn't actually that dissimilar. So they're doing that activity and chatting, and that's been the benefit. So and that's just a few examples. There's loads of other options out there, but that's something that certainly has been really helpful, particularly for some of the older children, to stay in contact with their peers. And I think the other thing is now about preparing them for September and contact with school, and what does school look like, because not every child has been able to go into school, and it's about how we re-establish that contact. I think the other thing is, for now is, can you try something new with your child, or can you just keep their existing skills going? So there's a few activity ideas at the end of this presentation, but it is about, can you identify a skill that they need to learn, or that they need to secure, and can you help them with that, and can you contact the OT to help you help them with it, so the OT can take on a coaching role that they could do via a video call. And I think that's then some way that you can feel that you will maybe move them on a little bit. Some of the other things that I've done with some of the teenagers, particularly that I've worked on, is trying to turn things around a little bit, where it's difficult with COVID to appreciate the positive things and the positive experiences from COVID. I think everyone's got sort of naturally gets drawn into the negative things and the limitations that we've all experienced, and so actually trying to remember what's happened, what's been nice, what's been good, has been really positive and useful for some children and young people. And there's some really lovely things online around time capsules that you can do. You can do COVID time capsules, and you can put those away, and then you can draw upon them maybe in 2 years' time and look back, because I think it is about trying to get across that yes, this is a challenging time, and that it's been pretty grim at times, but the resources, this is a moment in history, and they are living through a historical period, and it's sort of trying to get that message across. And a positive poster, it could have things like, you know, if they learn to put a sock on, that would go on their poster. If they had a positive call with a friend and it worked really well, that could go on their poster. It's a really personalised thing, and it doesn't have to be unique to the child, it could be for the whole family as well. And then I think the other message is really about getting active and going out for those walks as much as you can. We move on, please, James. So, learning a new skill, it is. These are some sort of top tips. It's about choosing the skills where possible with your child. You know, so really involving them in that process, which will help with their motivation. And then setting some goals to work on, but being realistic with what you're going to do. And I think that process can be really nicely supported by your occupational therapist, and they can give you that advice and help talk you through that. And also then you can draw up a home programme together, and they can give you some ideas as to how to approach some things. So for example, if you're wanting to work on shoelace tying and you're not quite sure how to do that, how to approach it, then you need to ask your occupational therapist, and she can run through some ideas and give you some techniques and talk that through, but also give examples of other activities that would help your child develop the hand function skills that they need to carry out that task. And then once you get going, you can evaluate together with your OT as well, and then they can help you to make some changes. The other thing is that you can also try and simplify things by seeing if alongside those sort of goals, can you bring in some of the physio goals, so you're actually doing it all in one go, so you're not having to think about separating all of the therapy goals and doing them in different chunks during the day. But equally, can you bring in educational goals? So if your child is learning colours, can you include that when they're doing some work around dressing? Just focus on a small number of activities though, don't overwhelm yourselves. And if it's not the right time now, I would just say don't worry, come back to it later when you can commit, when you feel like you're not under pressure. But also the same goes for your child, because if they do not want to do it, there is no point having a fight, because actually that's really detrimental to where you're going to take them. And so I think if you can weave whatever you want to do with them into your everyday family life and into play and try and have fun, that will really help the process. Next slide, please. So some of the coaching that an occupational therapist would take you through would be around grading activities, and it's really focusing on mastering a skill first before you move on to another one. So just breaking things up into chunks, doing them in quite a logical, sequential way, mastering it, practicing it, then moving on when you know it's secure. There's quite a lot around for those of you that like to read about things on mastery, and certainly the approach of mastery used in education, particularly in teaching maths, and so you might want to have a look at that. Another technique is backwards and forwards chaining. So when you're teaching an activity to the child, you only just start with the first thing. So if we go to the shoelace analogy, you maybe would just choose that you would get them to separate the two laces first, and that's the first thing that they would do, and that they would pull them tight in the shoe, and then they would maybe begin to make the loop. But you only move on when they can do each stage. So you build it up gradually. So you can either, that's forwards chaining, or you could start with the last point of an activity. So actually it might be that the last bit would be you've tied the lace for them, and they've just got to pull it tight, and that's the first thing they start with, and then they work backwards. And for other children, it might be that they just need a few verbal prompts, or maybe a physical prompt. I think it's key, if you're looking at they're getting quite good with a skill, that you then need to repeat the skill with variation, because we can all tie our shoelaces up wherever we are. So if I'm in America, in Italy, not that it's happening at the moment, or in the UK, if I'm stood up, I'm sitting down, I can tie my shoelace, and that's what we mean. We learn skills with variation, and so it's really important that you don't do the same setup. So you know, it doesn't matter which room they do it in, change it around a bit, mix it up, and give them some variation, because that will help them embed that skill a little bit further. The other thing is to also help them to learn by errorless learning, and by that we mean not allowing them to repeat mistakes, because actually then you just learn those mistakes, and it's assisting the learning by providing the opportunity to learn without making errors. So you actually sort of come in with a prompt to correct them and guide them in the right direction before they make that error. It's really frustrating if you don't do that as well. So managing the child's frustrations is really key, and getting that challenge just right, that's quite tricky, and that might be where your OT could just guide you a little bit, because if you don't get that challenge just right and you give them too much of a stretch, then actually they're probably going to get really frustrated and refuse to do it, and they will remember that, and the next time you try and do it, even if you've adjusted your approach, they may still refuse to do it. So don't keep going on with the task if it's not working. Change your approach, give it a break, come back to it a different day when the child's feeling better, you're maybe in a better place as well, and just make it part of your everyday routine. I think at the moment there's so much time in the morning compared to before the school run. It's a really good time, for example, to work on self-care skills if you've got the chance to do that. So try and do it in as least stressful environment as possible. Key thing, I find this hard as an OT, sit on your hands, don't help the child when they don't need when they don't need the help, and also the art of keeping silent, really tricky. But if you can do that, then that will be helpful for most children as well. Next slide, please. A lot of people ask about how much time do I need to commit to therapy, and how often and for how long will I do it? Will it be effective? I think the key message that's coming out from research at the moment, and the information I've put here, the Royal College of OT have just actually done an evidence-based update, so a research update on home programs, and this is what's out there at the moment, is that roughly if you do every other day for about 15 minutes over 2 to 6 months, you will have an impact. So the key message really is actually don't go mad, don't think you have to do loads. It's not as much as you maybe think. It's more about quality rather than quantity. So it's about giving your child a positive learning experience in terms of developing their skills, rather than just keeping at it and at it and at it, and particularly when they're tired and they're getting frustrated and they're getting grumpy. So I think for children who have got cerebral palsy, they've identified that if it's goal-based tasks, so very similar to what I've talked about, if you do 16 to 17-minute sessions 18 times a month for 8 weeks, that will have a benefit, and you'll see the child progress. For those of you who've come across constraint-induced movement therapy or bimanual training, it's when you've got a child who's got weakness down one side and you're trying to get them to use that weaker hand, then they may need longer sessions over a longer period, but we're not talking massively increasing. Low intensity upper limb activities incorporated in play. if you do 1 hour a week, you will have a small but sustained benefit. So I think, you know, that's really important to know, so that if you can have a positive play time together and regularly, you'll have a sustained benefit. Children who have intellectual disabilities, they have recognised that some of the learning needs a little bit longer to embed, but 15 minutes, 15 times per month for 20 weeks will have an impact. So I think, don't beat yourself up and don't think that you've got to do way more than that. If you're doing anything around those with your child, you will actually be making a difference. And if you have some support from an occupational therapist, so you can really target that input and really work on the quality of it, again, you'll have a sustained impact. Can we move on, please, James? My last slide is just about preparing your child for returning to school. It's a scary thought because it's not that far off now. And the College of Occupational Therapists, and there's a link at the bottom of this slide, so these are just the headlines and there's more information on the slide, have just published some guidance and things for you to think about as a parent in terms of returning and preparing your child for school. And I think it's really important, the sooner that you start preparing them, the better, so that actually you can build it up gradually. And that depends on, obviously, firstly on your child's individual needs, you know, what their personality is like, their strengths, what their requirements are, and actually whether they need things now and they need to have it explained over a period of time, or actually they're better nearer to the time. It's key to find out your child's worries. School is different and will be different. Some children might not actually be worried, they might not appreciate all those changes and the differences, but for others, being in a limited bubble, having to do hand hygiene, having to follow quite strict rules, you know, that's going to be quite tough. Remembering those rules will be a challenge, for example, for many of our children. And it's trying to unpick those worries and work through those before they return to school. I think also it's really key, a bit back to the first 2 slides, share with teachers and support staff your family's lockdown experience, so that they know what your child's been through, whether that's been positive or it's been challenging, and they can then obviously support them accordingly. Work together with the school, and there is a talk coming up in September about education, but one thing that everyone should be looking at when they, from an education perspective, when children return to school, they will be reassessed and their gaps will be identified in terms of their learning. And I think that's the key point for parents to become involved in terms of helping them to have a plan in terms of returning to school and how that's going to look, and are they going to have a graded return, are they going to have a certain approach, knowing exactly what that is, but also working out what the gaps are, because the parents, because you've been working with your child on homeschooling, you will be able to give quite a bit of information to the teachers. Use the child's preferred communication method if you draw up a return to school plan. So put symbols in, photos, social stories, whatever works for them as well, so that they have something that they can refer to. And I think it's also important to think about what will be the same. Not everything changes. Their friends will still be there. The teachers, you know, the teaching staff that they know, they may be on a different teacher, but this, you know, school, the buildings will be the same. Think about the activities that they do. They will do literacy and numeracy in the morning. Some things will be the same, so not everything will change. Find out how, but do find out how the school environment will be different, and if the teachers can film it for you, that would be fantastic, and so that you can then almost have a video that you can show your child of what the classroom is going to look like. So, because bubbles doesn't really mean a lot to children necessarily. The desk space, what will it be like? Will they be on a desk themselves? Will they be, how near will they be to their friends? Are they allowed to move from the desk? You know, it is going to be quite different. So it's finding out that sort of information and hopefully having it before they go back into school. But also knowing that just that those changes will see a period of time where maybe some of the behaviours that your children will have will be a little bit more challenging. I think all of this is relevant for whether you've got a child with a disability, by the way, or a child that has no disability, because I think it's a challenge for whoever is going to be returning to school. And I think it's about the positives of what you learned with your child during lockdown, and can you share that with the teaching staff? You know, what helped them stay calm and what little tricks you've learned as parents. Next slide, please. So at the end of this talk, so the next 3 slides are lots of links to different resources, and we're going to just whiz through these very quickly, and then it gives us time for questions. So there's a direct link that you can click on, and then there's explanations, and then you can access those at your leisure, and hopefully that'll just give you a few more resources. I think it's fair to say that actually most of the resources, these have been pulled together because of COVID, but actually they could be useful for many long school holidays and summer holidays. So some of the things that you've learnt now during COVID, I would bear in mind for the summer holidays next year, for example, or any school holidays, because most of our children, we know, do not function well with a loss of structure and routine. So hopefully some of the skills that you've developed during this period, if you can reflect back and think that you have, and I'm sure you will have done, will be really helpful going forward as well as parents. And I think, moving on, James, that should just take us to our questions and answers, I think.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think everybody would agree there was a huge volume of information in there. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback at the moment. I hope that's not interfering for everybody else. That seems to have improved. Yes, so as I was saying, yeah, a huge volume of content there, and lots of really practical advice for families to take forward. For me, I have to say, as a mum of 3, yeah, I hold my hand up. We have a timetable at home already. We have a chalkboard in our kitchen that everything gets recorded on for the week ahead. And I think the biggest benefit for us in our household for having that is it takes away some of the uncertainty about the whole vast week ahead and what that's going to involve, because everybody can look at it on a day by day basis. I also think it's really important to go back to what you were saying at the beginning as well, Jessica, and to reassure families that even though service delivery is different at the moment, even though they may have had more limited access to their therapists, they still have that opportunity and need to make use of having the opportunity to contact their OT services when they feel there is a need. And I thought having the helpful hints of what language to use to prioritise your child's need was absolutely brilliant. I know that I will be sharing that with many of our clients over the months ahead. Just a reminder for everybody that the slides from today's presentation can be made available to you. We're conscious that some of them have been prepared as a handout resource for you to go back to, or have hyperlinks on them for you to access in your own time. So please get in touch if those don't come through to you automatically. So it is open to questions now. I know that we've got a number of people listening live. It would be great to have your thoughts and input. We do actually have a couple of questions that came through prior to the event today. I don't know if we've got those participants on the line. Hopefully we do. And the first one is regarding family meal times. Jessica, I know this is a topic very close to your own heart. I was hearing about your son's cooking activities before we came live this afternoon. And the query is, my child is really struggling to stay sat still at meal times, doesn't seem to be able to kind of concentrate throughout the meal, and the parent is concerned that really, I suppose, that they're getting the most out of meal times that they need to. What would your advice be in that scenario? Okay,
a little bit. It's always tricky giving advice when you don't know a child. So this is going to be general advice, and I think. But my first thing is, if you try things and it doesn't work, then I would ask for a conversation with your OT, who hopefully will know your child better. If they're struggling to concentrate, I think the first thing to think about is, are they sat on something that's supporting them enough? So some children don't function well if they're sat on quite a big seat and their feet aren't touching the floor and that sort of thing. And it might be that they can't concentrate because they just haven't got enough postural support and support to keep a sitting position. So they're having to work really hard to keep sat upright and therefore haven't got enough concentration to also sustain and keep going with feeding. So that's one aspect, is the seating right. Another thing is, for some children, particularly those who are younger and have got attention deficit, for example, sitting to eat at around a family table can be really challenging because there's lots of noise going on. It's often in the kitchen. Some people will also have the television on or some music, so there'll be background noise. So sensory wise, it can be quite a lot. So it might be, in terms of helping them with their concentration, that you think about reducing some of that background noise and distraction. So turn the telly off, don't have the washing machine going at the same time as tea time, for example, all those things. If they're still struggling to concentrate, I think at the bottom line, it's really important that they get enough nutrition in them. And we all worry as parents, don't we, particularly if you're a feeder, that you're feeding your child well enough. So is it that they can do the first bit, and then actually do they need a little bit of assistance to make sure that they've taken on enough food, or do they need quite high energy packed type food so they don't have to eat vast amounts and they're getting enough calories? And that also might be where you want to speak to a dietitian or your paediatrician for advice on that. So there's lots of different factors. Some people will also introduce things like a timer, and so that the child knows the rule that they've got to sit for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, and they've got to eat their food. And some people will do a small amount, so it'll on the plate, so it'll last for that 5 minutes. The child can then go off, have a break, do something different, and then come back again and have a second portion for another 5 minutes. So again, you're chunking up the activity. It's very individual though, it depends what works. So try things out, and if it's not quite working, ask for some further advice.
Thanks, Jessica. I think that's really, really good advice there. And I think family meal times can be fraught in lots of households for lots of different reasons. The second question that we've had come through, a totally different topic, which is good. It keeps it interesting, and this is regarding the return to school, which you have already touched upon. What I would say is a reminder to everybody about Shelley's webinar, which is coming up later in August on the 26th, which will tackle the return to school scenario in more detail. But let's just look at this question for a moment. So it says, my child, and it's got in brackets, with an EHCP in place, is very anxious about school and the return, and is already saying they're not going to go. Help.
So the challenge we've got at the moment is now it's obviously school holidays. So it's actually firstly, can you even get hold of anyone in a school? But if you do have the email address of the SENCO or the head teacher, head of year, class teacher, whoever is your contact person, I would trigger that and send them an email to say these are your concerns. It might be that for that child with lots of anxiety, they need a gradual reintroduction to school, and that going back full time might be too much. And it's really thinking that one through and how that can be managed. So that's why you do need to have that conversation with school. I know that the National Autistic Society has got some really nice social stories around school and COVID. So it's worth just looking at one or two resources as well. Some of the social stories that are floating around are really useful. I think, but one of the key things is actually talking with your child about what those anxieties are, if you're able to, and trying to work out exactly what it is that they're worrying about, because sometimes you then find that actually it's not a worry that they need to worry about. It might not actually be something that's going to happen, so you might actually be able to rapidly reassure them, but you might have to repeat that reassurance and touch base with them regularly about it. So I think it's really connecting up, and it's that return to school plan that is key, I think, for children. For those children that did return, again, this is from my teacher friend that did return, so the year sixes, the nurseries, the year ones that returned, in that tranche that were allowed to go back to school, there was, for all of those children, particularly the year sixes, so it's interesting, I think, because they had a greater level of understanding of how things had changed, they demonstrated in the first 24-48 hours a heightened level of anxiety returning to school. And I think it's particularly because it takes so long to get each child to wash their hands correctly, and to follow the hygiene routines and things like that. But they are in a constant bubble, and they're with the constant adults. There's not lots of adults chopping and changing, so that does help, particularly for those children that don't like change. Once they get used to that new norm, their bubble and the adults are more constant than maybe they would have been previously. Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and with your teacher friends saying, nobody has been left kind of unscarred from the impact of COVID, and I think it's a very normal reaction for children to have heightened levels of anxiety about returning to school. I also think it's important to report back that despite those initially heightened levels of anxiety, after the routines have been re-established, there was very positive feedback, overwhelmingly positive feedback, certainly from the schools that I have had contact with, about how well children have adapted and accepted those new routines. So I think a lot of the anxiety is around those initial uncertainties, and the more that we can do to prepare children for that, the better. The other thing that I would just add to that, and it goes back to the fact that the person posing the question has said that their child does already have an EHCP in place, is that we know that there have been delays and missed opportunities for reviewing EHCPs because of the pandemic. And it may well be that there need to be adjustments to the EHCP and the way that it's delivered in school to reflect the new normal. And that's something that you would need to discuss initially with the SENCO, and to see what the process would be for getting those amendments made. There'll be more information about that and how to go about it later this year on the 10th of September, when we have our EHCP webinar. So please listen into that if it's going to be useful to you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Sorry, Jessica, did you just want to come in there with one last point? I have just seen there's some questions come through. So our email addresses are at the end, so that we've not had time to answer. So if you have questions that you've not had a chance to answer, if you want to email us, email us both together, and then we'll try and come back with an answer for you. Yeah, that's not a problem. What will happen is that your emails will automatically come through to us from the tech, our tech support, and we will be able to pick up on that for you. So I'm getting weird things on my screen. Okay. Hope everybody can still hear me. So that brings us to the conclusion for today's webinar. Just a quick reminder that you can access a whole array of information about our responses to COVID via the Irwin Mitchell website, and the screenshot of that has come up on your screens now. You can also post questions on there and make suggestions for any future web content that you would like to see from us. I hope that you've enjoyed the session today. My sincere thanks to Jessica for giving up her time. I think it's proven to be a really useful discussion, and I'm sure one that will continue for many months to come as well.
and I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on the next seminar on the 26th. Take care. Bye bye.